My name is Peter, and welcome again to the workshop here at Sunny Beaches. Today's video, we're going to talk about the shaper feature of the MiniMax CU300 combination woodworking machine. If you haven't watched the first video in this series, which was an overview and introduction to the CU300, I'd suggest you start there first. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with the term shaper, a shaper is basically a large industrial grade router table. It's used for putting a profile on a board. The shaper lives beneath this circular cover in the surface of the table. This is actually a set of concentric rings. To access the shaper, you install one of the crank handles onto a shaft here on the side of the machine, release a locking knob on the back, and turn counterclockwise to raise the spindle. Here we have the spindle fully raised. This is a 1 1/4 inch spindle, which is what came with the machine in my case. And 1 1/4 inch is a standard American size, although when I shop for shapers, I see that 3/4 inch shapers are much more prevalent and available than 1 1/4 inch bore shapers. So the 3/4 inch is perhaps more common, and you can get a 3/4 inch spindle from MiniMax. We also have a variety of spacers to take up whatever portion of the shaft is not taken up by a cutter head itself. And then there's a top cap and finally a bolt that will hold everything securely in place. This is a big spanner wrench that is used to when you're going to change shapers. So the head of this will engage in the slots here on the base. Since I only have the one spindle, I never need to change it. Here we have my collection of shaper cutters. Not a very large collection, really. This is a system with insert blades. So you get a lot of profiles at a lower cost per profile than with fixed profile cutters. This came with the machine. As I recall, my salesman threw it in. It does get a fair amount of use, and in fact we'll be using it today to take our one board project to the next step. The cutters are replaced using an Allen wrench. So fixed profile cutters, I've got, this is we'll cut cope and stick cabinet door profiles. Both the cope and the stick from the single cutter head, just set to different heights. We've got a raised panel bit. This will give me a 1/4 inch full round over and a 3/4 inch full round over, and I use these for creating trim for my house. There are, of course, a lot of other profiles available. So the first step in installing a shaper cutter is to open this door on the rear of the machine and pull out this lever at the top, which will lock the spindle, preventing it from turning. This, by the way, is the third and final place on the machine where there's a micro switch. In this case, it will prevent the machine from running if the door is open. When installing a shaper cutter, it's often a good idea to take a moment and stop and think about the direction of rotation of the shaper spindle. It can be set to rotate either clockwise or counterclockwise. In this particular situation, we're going to be using this 1/4 round over profile here right at the top of this knife, and we'll position the cutter so that the rest of the knife is below the surface of the table. So we're going to want the cutter to rotate this way, counterclockwise, and we'll feed stock through from the direction of the front of the table. And that's pretty much the default setup of the shaper on the CU300. But there are situations where you may need to turn the cutter over. Say, for instance, we wanted to use this coving profile. And now we need to have the cutter rotate in the other direction, clockwise. And if the cutter is rotating clockwise and we fed the stock through from the front of the machine, we'd be doing what's called climb cutting. And there's a tendency for the knife to want to grab the stock and pull it through. And that can be somewhat dangerous. But in most situations, you have the option of walking to the other side of the machine and feeding stock through from the direction of the back of the machine, in which case you're once again doing a safe mode of operation. When you install a cutter head, logically enough, the general recommendation is that it be as low on the spindle as you can get it. So you generally start with your cutter head being the first thing to go on the spindle, and then you need to take up the rest of the room using spacers, and finally on top a cap, and then the whole stack is held down with a bolt. But you want to make sure that this spacer or the cap hasn't bottomed out on the top of the shaft. You want to make sure it's actually pulling down. So adding the big spacer, it's not clear to me that we're not going to bottom out. So we'll add an additional small spacer there. And then the cap. And now I'm sure that when the bolt is tightened, that it will be providing that downward pressure on the whole stack. So before I close up the back of the machine, I wanted to make note of this four-way pulley that's on the top of the motor that drives the shaper. And there's a similar one on the bottom of the spindle shaft. And this is where you can adjust the speed of the shaper. So, and there's a chart here on the door that's supposed to help you pick the most appropriate speed for the cutter you're using. And there's a lot more information in the owner's manual on this, most of which I find pretty incomprehensible. So I tend not to play around with this much and just leave it at one setting. So for most operations, a shaper needs a fence and a hood. And this is the one that came with the CU300 when I bought it. This attaches to the table through this set of holes. You can't really see. There's a total of 4 holes here, and you pick one set or the other, depending on exactly how you need to position this. And at the end of these knobs is a bolt that will go into one pair of those holes or the other. So I've now got the 2 hold-down bolts partially threaded into a set of holes in the table. That can be a bit of a tricky operation. Sometimes I have to use a flashlight to peer down through the whole hood to find the holes in the bottom. So the fence is obviously a 2-part fence. The 2 halves can be moved independently, although generally I just have them pushed as close to each other as they will go. So with this hood, by turning this knob here, you can move the half of the fence that's closer to the back of the machine this way, further away from the shaper cutter. Now, the only reason that I can think of that you might ever want to do that is if you wanted to use the shaper as a kind of a jointer. But since this machine has a perfectly fine jointer, I've never used this feature and always have it coplanar with the other fence. Here at the back of the hood, we also have the dust collection port for the shaper. And for some strange, mysterious reason, this dust collection port is slightly larger than every other dust collection port on the machine. So this fitting, which is a 5-inch to 120 millimeter reducer, which will work on every other dust port, as I've said, won't work here, and I have to remove it and clamp my flexible hose directly to the hood. So one final feature of the shaper hood is this bit of safety gear. I'm not quite sure what to call it. I might call it a hold down, but it also holds in. The manual, which has some interesting translations, calls it a presser, which I guess isn't too bad a term. But obviously it will hold stock down against the table and in against the fence, and does a very good job of it. I really like this. So it can be adjusted in as many ways as it needs to be to get it set for any piece of wood that's more or less regularly shaped. And you just slide through and you're good to go. In the video about the table saw feature of the CU300, I showed you the longer crosscut fence. But I did also mention that there's a shorter crosscut fence, and this is it. It's about 36 inches long. Like the longer fence, it can be extended, in this case, up to about 65 inches. It's actually the same aluminum extrusion as the longer fence and shares many of the same features. The stops that can be used on the longer fence can also be used here on the shorter fence when it's in this configuration. It can, of course, be used with the clamps. The clamp post has a flange at the base of it, which can be engaged in a slot that's on the face of the fence, which provides another point of attachment and a little more stability for the fence. Like the longer fence, this fence can slide, but it slides towards the shaper, which is a good thing because it's frequently used in conjunction with the shaper. When you slide it back, it comes into contact with a stop, which provides for repeatable accuracy with regards to the ruler on the fence. One of the key features of this fence is that it can pivot. Up to 60 degrees in either direction. There are indents at some of your more popular angles. To show you a little bit more about the fence, I'm going to take it off and turn it over. So this is the underside of the shorter rip fence. Here is the stop block that I mentioned in the channel on the bottom. There are two tabs here that will register in the slot on the side of the slider, and this metal bar that will also slide into that slot, and then these two handles will be turned to firmly clamp the fence to the side of the slider. There is a brass set screw with a locking nut here that can be used to adjust the angle of the fence with regard to the surface of the table. There are two more set screws with locking nuts here at the pivot point, which can be adjusted to ensure that the fence is 90 degrees to the saw blade. And this handle will lock the fence both with regard to pivoting and to sliding. I use this shorter fence more often in conjunction with the table saw than I do with the shaper. So, and this is the way I have it configured when using it with the table saw. But when using it with the shaper, most commonly I will use a different configuration that has a different nose piece and uses different stops. So here we have the short fence rigged in what I call shaper mode. We've removed the flush plastic nose piece, and in its place have a piece of wood that's attached to the face of the fence. In order for this all to work, the stop acts not just like a stop, but also as a standoff. The main body of the stop is the same thickness as the piece of wood here, so that when they're used together, your workpiece will still be parallel to the fence. Also note that the leading edge of the stop is not the actual stop, it's this spring-loaded mechanism here. So as the machine came to me from the factory, there was kind of a built-in assumption in the way it was configured that that the short fence would be used in this configuration all the time. But I really prefer the configuration that was in place on the longer fence. So I did buy myself a second flush nose piece, and when I'm using the fence in conjunction with the table saw, I'll use the other style of stop. So what we need to do next is to set the height of the cutter and the position of the fence so that we get the profile we want. We'll start by setting the height of the cutter. So normally when I'm setting the height of the shaper, I'll get a nice flat piece of scrap and hold it against the surface of the table to use as a gauge. We're going to be putting a round over on the edges of our board, but I want a little bit of reveal as well in the surface, and I'm not too fussy about the exact dimension of that reveal. So we'll just eyeball something that looks good. And when the height is set, tighten up the locking knob to lock everything in place. So our wooden nose piece is going to be sacrificial. It's going to serve as a backer when we do crosscuts to help prevent tear out. And so it's also going to take on our profile. So the first thing I'm going to do is slide the crosscut fence in and out until I think I've got it in position where it's going to get the right profile. And then I'll clamp that in place. Then I'll turn the cutter to get it out of the way, and I'll bring the hood toward the crosscut fence until the hood fence registers against the nose piece. On both sides. And now I've got the hood fence where I think I need it. And just as importantly, I'm guaranteed that it is set 90 degrees from the crosscut fence. Before we turn the shaper on, we're here at the front of the machine, the control panel. The function selection switch needs to be moved to the left to select the shaper. This is the switch that controls the direction of rotation of the shaper spindle. It's set to counterclockwise, which is what we want. Moving it to the right would select clockwise. We have a warning symbol here because if you're feeding stock from the front of the machine and your rotation is clockwise, you'll be climb cutting. You can avoid that by feeding stock from the rear of the machine, as we said before. Then we'll take a piece of scrap that is flat and square, and we'll run a test cut. So that actually came out pretty much perfectly. I've got the nice reveal I was looking for on this edge. That's an appropriate dimension there. And on this other edge, I've got just the faintest trace of a reveal, which will sand out easily, and I like seeing that because that's an indication that I got the full profile, the full 90 degrees that I was looking for. So I feel kind of like Norm, you know, the workshop where everything comes out perfectly. But I'll show you how I would go about tweaking the setup if I needed to. So there really isn't much to be said about finding the appropriate height setting for the cutter head. The fine-grained control provided by the crank handle really makes that a straightforward and easy process. Establishing the correct position for the shaper hood and its fence is a little trickier, but I've come up with a technique over the years that allows me to make small adjustments to the position of the hood quickly, reliably, and accurately. And it's similar to the process we went through when we first set up the hood, in that we're going to use the nose piece on the crosscut fence as a reference point. So we register the fence on the hood against the nose piece. But we add one more tool to the process, which is a set of feeler gauges. So let's say when you do your test cut, you're not getting the full profile that you're looking for. In our case, say we weren't getting that full 90-degree radius we wanted. That would mean that you need to expose a little bit more of the shaper cutter, and that means that you need to move the hood that way. And let's say that you decide that an appropriate amount of adjustment is 2/100ths of an inch, or a little over 1/2 millimeter. So you take your feeler gauge and loosen up your clamping knobs on the hood just a little, and insert the feeler gauge between the nose of the crosscut fence and the shaper hood fence, and retighten a little, and repeat the process on the other side. And double check, and we're good. And then as a last step, loosen up your crosscut fence and reestablish its position against the hood fence. And you're ready for another test cut. If, on the other hand, your test cut found that too much of the cutter was exposed and you needed to reduce it, you'd basically reverse the process. So you'd start by loosening the clamps on the crosscut fence, and you'd pull it back and insert the feeler gauge between the nose and the hood fence. And then, again, loosen the clamps a little and pull the hood until it registers against the nose piece. So I find that I can usually pretty quickly dial in the right position for the shaper hood to give me the profile that I'm looking for. We are now ready to continue with our one board project. We're going to be putting that round over profile on all four edges of what will be the front, the exposed side of the board. And we're going to start with the crosscuts on the ends. We shouldn't get much in the way of tear out due to the sacrificial nose piece, but if we did, it would get cleaned up when we did the long edges with the grain. So for these cuts, we've got the workpiece firmly clamped to the slider, so we don't need to deploy the hold in, hold down safety piece, and in fact it would be in the way. So let's go. And now we'll do the long edges with the grain. And hopefully you can see that that gave us a pretty clean and consistent cut. So that's it, the MiniMax CU300 shaper. The fifth and final function on the CU300 is the horizontal mortiser. So that will be the subject of our next video. See you then, and thanks for watching.